Welcome to your Monday. I'm Jay Cleveland Payne, a.k.a. your Mr. Monday, and this quick bit of motivation and inspiration was originally published on November the 1st, 2021. The original message goes as follows. You can start a story with the finale and even tell the whole story backwards, but you do not get the full context of any story unless you tell it completely, even if out of natural order. So going deeper into this one, this is a message that is semi-inspired by the movie Memento, but also just sort of inspired by listening to people tell stories. And something that happened in Memento is a guy wakes up every single morning with no memory, but a batch of tattoos and new tattoos basically every single day that tell the story of what happened many days before going backwards so that he can figure out a riddle, a puzzle, a mystery. And that's something that is sort of in vogue in storytelling, or at least was in the middle 90s and pops back in here or there, where you see stories told sort of in flashbacks where you'll be somewhere and you'll get the context of why they got there in a flashback or things like that. Lost, of course, a very popular TV show for also being very frustrating, was a show that started off with a mystery, a bunch of people on a deserted island that got there by mysterious circumstances, and then flashbacks to their past to figure out who these people were, and then in the final season, flash forwards of their lives after they supposedly got off the island, but they were alternate lives that they didn't actually live. And there's whole sort of, weirdness to talk about that. We're not going to go into the theories on how Lost ended today. But we're going to talk about storytelling, even if we're not talking so much about storytelling. Now, I also do a podcast on telling stories and getting messages out and whatever. But this is not about that so much. This is about essentially you relaying a message to someone else in story form, because I believe basically all things are stories. Data are simply bits and pieces that tell a story of something. You can start with the very end. Why is there glass on the floor? Well, what had happened was so on and so forth. You can start at the end of the story, the actual finale, the thing that happened. You can start in the middle and go back and forth. You can tell the whole story backwards, as I say here. But the full context doesn't come until you get what the beginning is. Now, this based on who you're telling the story to and why you're telling the story in that direction, it may make a difference if people stay engaged as it goes. But often, the more interesting stories start a few beats ahead, a few steps ahead into the main story, and sometimes right before the big shebang happens. Now, you do need some sort of origin to get there, so you get there when you can. But think about a movie where it starts off with big action and then it goes back to a flashback to the beginning of the ordeal, how they got there, how they grew up, how they learned the skill they're about to use right now, and what sort of tragic event happened in between that kept them from using that skill for a long time. This is the stuff of Hollywood movie storytelling, but this is also how you tell stories as well. Remember, the glass on the floor, something broke. You get to the end of it, and then the story you believe is, how did this glass break? But the actual end of the story may be the person who broke it cleaning it up, or just a random person getting it out of the way, or finding out that the person who broke it actually cut themselves in the process of the accident or purpose thing, and then has to get that cut cleaned up as a part of the lesson. Sometimes things are told all over the place. That may actually be the center of the story. But the context comes from, why is there glass on the floor? A child was trying to get a cookie out of the cookie jar and accidentally spill it over. A person had their arms full of stuff coming in the house and was trying to balance it and putting on one counter, and ended up knocking over the cookie jar. Something very traumatic happened, and in sort of a burst of emotion, they swung their arm out and knocked over the cookie jar. There's your context. Something happened that caused this actual action, and that's why this thing is here. Is that the end of the story? Well, it depends on how the story's going. But you can get to a point where you realize the actual thing has been done and you're working backwards. The mysteries of mysteries, if you will. Whether you are trying to tell someone about what happened to some person and then giving them the filling in the details of it, whether someone is trying to explain to you why it's very important that you stop doing this thing right now because whatever it led up to it for them was a problem. When you have a person who's trying to explain to you in deep detail the decision you're about to make is a really bad one, and they go back into why their decision they made similar did not work out for them, is kind of how things work out. We actually don't often start stories or information things in the beginning and going through the straight middle and the end. Think of any headline you read on any newspaper, if you get newspapers these days, or on websites or at the news when they open up with their teaser to the actual story. They'll tell you what happened. They'll tell you a little bit about who it happened to and how it grew to be a thing. Sometimes they show you the very end of it because it is the end of it. Man catches largest fish ever. Okay, that's a full story in itself, but how did we get there? Man was on vacation. He was on a boat and just sort of, didn't really have much to do. So he's out there fishing, expecting just a quiet afternoon. And he somehow wrangles the largest fish ever. There's a full story that started with the climax and from there. And maybe you can add, there was some sort of ordeal about the actual weighing of it. We had a story lately, as we're recording this now, in the past couple months, where we've had a lot of largest fish caught ever. And one of those stories ended up with the person realizing after he cut it up and fed it to some folks that he didn't get it weighed first, and it would have been the largest fish ever based on just how much food it provided. And he thought that was something. There's always extra, always context, always something more. But as you're explaining things, as your storytelling goes, you will probably find that you usually start your stories in the middle or towards the actual finale. But you can't get any context. You can't get the full story. You don't understand all of it until you find a way to tell it completely, and that's even if you happen to tell it backwards or with amnesia and tattoos, although I would not suggest amnesia and tattoos. You can start a story with a finale and even tell the whole story backwards, but you do not get the full context of any story unless you tell it completely, even if out of natural order. This original message was published on November the 1st, 2021 from Welcome to Your Monday. For more messages like this one, plus books, merchandise, and other information related to this project, visit the website, welcometoyourmonday.com.